Thank you, Deputy. And I'll call on Deputy Clare Daly. Thank you.
I have to find myself agreeing with my fellow trade unionist Deputy Ross in his analysis of the role of some of the trade union leaders at the moment. Although my union, it's half the fees that he's been charged at the moment, but we probably still get as little of the service as he does. I have to say it is a great irony to have to witness and listen to the comments of some of the Labour deputies who've tried to pose themselves as the great defenders and of protectors of workers from attack in recent period, because the reality actually belies that situation. We live in a time now where the idea of a secure, permanent, pensionable job is becoming a thing of the past, where people are looking back not with, nostalgia, not out of any rhetoric, but to a reality of the casualisation of labour and insecure employment in a way in which hasn't been seen in actual fact for decades. And the poverty figures that this government has stood over, 16% on an income of less than €210 a week, almost 800,000 people in this state living at risk of poverty. And that's a reality. And we can talk about legislation protecting workers' rights, protecting women's rights, as other deputies have, about equal pay, and that's okay on paper. The reality is that the figures show that the lives of working women are way behind in terms of their male counterparts because of the lack of a social wage, the lack of adequate childcare, the lack of other supports, which mean that many women have to leave the workforce and end up in insecure, part-time and vulnerable situations. And that, to me, is not a fitting legacy to the heroes of the Jacobs and the women workers who led the struggle there in 1913. I think it's an irony and a reflection of the present situation that the Rights Commissioner service actually went on a reduced working week over the last period in time. And one of the reasons why they did was partly because of a reduced workload. Now, is that reduced workload because workers are being better served at the moment than they were previously? No. The reality is it was for two reasons. The first reason is that most of the cases being brought before Rights Commissioners are to do with ones where people are losing their jobs and they come simply to get their last week's wages, to get their holiday pay or a reference or whatever. The reality is that Rights Commissioners are not hearing many of the cases that need to be fought because workers are afraid, because the idea, well, you're lucky to have a job, is the ideology that is promoted and stood over by this government. And we do have to take a step back. On a global scale, our society is wealthier than it ever was before, and yet we have millions of young people lying idle, while millions of older people have to work longer because they have an inadequate pension. And yet there is much necessary work to be done that could improve the lot of people in society. You know, we can look at things and say in many ways everything is different, but it also stays the same, because poverty is relative. And it is the case that we have the return of soup kitchens. It is the case that maybe tenements are gone, but are they really? When we have people in Priory Hall purchasing a home which is a noose around their neck, which they've had to move out of, and so on. And the reason why workers' share of the national wealth has reduced over the past number of years is precisely because the trade union movement has lost its way somewhat. It's precisely because the gains that workers and ordinary people have in this society weren't granted, they were fought for. And the leadership at the helm today is very different than the likes of Connolly and Larkin. And we have now the prospect of this generation being poorer than their parents. I think it is an absolute disgrace. I mean, James Connolly and Jim Larkin were imprisoned. They were visionaries, they gave a view of a new society. We have people today at the helm of the union movement, people in the banking sector on salaries almost of €200,000, trade union leaders, in defined benefit schemes where their members' defined benefit schemes are getting absolutely shafted. The President of the Teachers' Union of Ireland, who stood over a new starting rate for teachers of less than €30,000, herself on over €150,000. How can these people represent the interests of ordinary workers? They simply can't. And the Labour Party in government are simply a mouthpiece for the status quo, for these individuals. Many trade union members have bankrolled your participation in this this Parliament, through our union fees, been going to subsidise your election, and we have been betrayed disastrously.